Awesome. All right. So welcome. What we're going to do is we're going to kick it off from where we left off last week, which is going to be on page 4. So we're right in Bill's story. And for those that are just joining for the first time this week, as we go through Bill's story, it's like, okay, what are we doing? What are we looking for? Like, what's going on here? You know, this old, when I got here, let me tell you, he was old. The longer I've been around here, the more I'm like, what a reasonably aged fella he was. But when I got here, he was old. And like, what does this old dude from the 1930s have to do with me and my problems? I don't get it. I don't relate. And so what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to see Bill Wilson's symptoms of alcoholism, especially as we're in this part of the book. So what we're looking for is his examples from his own life of the cycle. And what we're looking for is his lack of control. What happens once he starts to drink and he cannot control the amount that he takes, but also his lack of choice. Those times where he's saying, I'm not going to do it again. And he does it again. You know, he's that insane thought that takes him back time and time again to that first drink. And so where we're picking up on page 4 is next morning. It's near the bottom of the page. And just to kind of set the stage, what's happened. So Bill Wilson, his whole worth, value, money, sense of status, sense of importance, sense of who he is tied up in the stock market. I can't see any problems with that. There's no issue, no looming threat or things going bad. So abruptly in October 1929, the stock market plummets. It crashes. And this is the stock market crash that sends the United States and then inevitably the world into the Great Depression. Keep in mind, that's where Bill's, sense of worth, sense of value, sense of all of these things are tied up in. And we were talking about, like, right before the meeting, you get a couple drinks in you, you got no problems. I got it. I can solve it. I'll take on the world. That's where Bill was. He's hearing about people committing suicide and he's like, oh, absolutely not. I'm not going to end my life over this. I'm going to go back to the bar. So he's still getting his sense of ease and comfort. And so it says the next morning, I telephoned a friend in Montreal. Oh, thank goodness, because we know there's no alcoholics in Canada. That's a perfectly safe place to be, Welcome to all my other Canadian friends, right? And I love it when I'm in and around Montreal, when I'm like, no alcoholics there. I'm hoping we got some Montrealers today. Go Habs, sports. I don't, every study, I don't know why it turns into this. Go sports, but here we are. And so next morning, I telephoned a friend in Montreal. He had plenty of money left and thought I had better go to Canada. Now, this is one of the things, the fun facts, I'll tell you the who's who and the what's what. This guy's name, you don't even have to write it in your book. His name is Dick Johnson. And unfortunately, that'll be the only thing you remember from this study. Oh, his name was Dick Johnson. Don't need to write that down. And he worked for a company called Green Shields & Co. And it says, by the following spring, we were living in our accustomed style. So this is the year 1930. He's back on top. Everything's great. And you see, oftentimes I confused why I was drinking and using and whatever brings you to the study. I was confusing why I was drinking with my external circumstances. I'm sure no one else has ever blamed their drinking on things going on outside of them. I'm sure everyone was able to look inward and identify the symptoms of alcoholism right away. But me, I was looking outward and I was blaming my alcoholism on stuff going on around outside of me. And it might be tempting to do this, to see, Bill, well, of course he's drinking. The stock market crashed. How could you not? Well, it's a year later and he's back to his accustomed style. He's back to his sense of worth and importance. And man, he's got the money rolling and things are good. And so he says, I felt like Napoleon returning from Elba. No St. Helena for me. And that's one of these little metaphors that it's so interesting and so telling, but I so did not fully understand when I got here. So this is I happen to have a little notebook. I know screen sharing might be the way to go, but we're not doing that. I have this little notebook, and it's got this dude by the name of Napoleon. And Napoleon was the emperor of France. And you're probably like, Paige, what the heck does this have to do with my illness? Well, let's see if we can relate to a little like Napoleon, a little like Bill Wilson. So before Napoleon ended up being the emperor of France, they had a series of kings. And the series of kings, now I'm not saying I believe this is true, but it works for a pretty good metaphor. The series of kings and rulers they had, they believed were ordained by God. And so that's why they tried to keep it in the bloodline. God said, now I'm not saying I agree, I'm just saying they thought that God ordained this bloodline. And so when a new king would come into power in France, the Pope would put the crown on the king's head and say, yep, God says this is the good guy to be in charge. And so that was the symbology of that. Now there's this, when Napoleon came into power, became the emperor of France, there's this famous painting of Napoleon. And he's got a golden laurel wreath, like a golden crown essentially. And it's this famous painting where he's putting it on his own head. Now, what is he saying? He's saying, I have decided I am worthy to be king. Just like Bill Wilson has decided that I am king of my own life. I am ruler of my life. I am deciding what's best for me. Now, I might throw out that that is some unmitigated gall. My gall happens to be a little more mitigated. I did not think I was empress of anything, not even of the dumpster I was drinking behind. You know what I'm saying? But I did think, man, I know what's best for me. I know what I need. I know what's best. And so maybe in that way, I've been the emperor of my life. And Napoleon, he was like, hey, I can take on too much. I can't relate to taking on too much. Like a land war with Russia in the winter, taking on too much, overcommitting himself. And I'm making it a little more relatable because most of us aren't like, yeah, no, I'm going to invade Europe. That's a little outside of our little plans and designs. But Napoleon, he's got to like conquer the world. And he has a failed war with Russia and you know, some failed wars. And the people in France are like, GTFO, get out of here, Napoleon. We don't want you. They knew that if they killed him, he'd be a martyr. So they sent him to this island in the Mediterranean called Elba. And that's what Bill felt like. He felt like he was exiled, cut off from his source of power and importance and money. And he's in this little island of the stock market has crashed. But he comes to Canada and he's back on top and back on track, just like Napoleon. Napoleon was, hey, psych, no guys, I'm gonna come back to France. I'm gonna be the emperor again. I'm crushing it. Yeah. That is verbatim. That's exactly what Napoleon said, even in English. So crazy. I am so sorry if there's anyone here that's actually like a history person or like a history, people are welcome, or a history teacher, because I know I am butchering it. But Napoleon, he's back as the emperor of France, just like Bill is the emperor of his life. I'm doing it in Canada. Woo! It's rocking and rolling. And he says, no Saint Helena for me. And what happened for Napoleon is France was like, absolutely not, absolutely not. So they exiled him to this tiny island in the middle of the Atlantic where he lived until he died. And Bill Wilson's like, no, I'm back on track. I'm not going to get exiled again. He's about to get exiled again. And it says, but drinking caught up with me again. And my generous friend had to let me go. This time we stayed broke. Now, keep in mind, Bill is back on top. He's back on track. And when it says drinking caught up with him again, not the stock markets, not the economy, not anything to do with that, but everything to do with his inability to control the amount that he takes once he starts to drink. He drank his way out of that job and drank his way out of that job and opportunity. So even though I had never been no Napoleon, I do know what it's like to drink myself out of employment. Maybe that might be relatable for some of you. Or drink myself out of that thing that I thought was going to give me that sense of value and worth and importance. And it says, we went to live with my wife's parents. Ooh, we're we're moving in with the in-laws. You know what I mean? I don't know anyone here that's jazzed to be living with the in-laws. Now, keep in mind, in many times when we go through this book, it's actually more helpful to lay aside some of the cultural ideas of the 1930s. But imagine being a man where you're expected to provide and support and do all this stuff for your family, and you have to move in with your wife's parents. See, I can't relate to that, but I can relate to not being able to show up, and I can relate to being a disappointment, and I can relate to letting people down. And Bill Wilson, the wife's parents, Lois's parents' house, it was 182 Clinton Street in Brooklyn, New York, and you can actually you can look it up online. It's still there. But an interesting thing is he moved into that house, in his alcoholism, and when they lost that house was actually in sobriety. And I just want to point that out, just because, man, sometimes we think we get sober and everything's going to be like easy breezy lemon squeezy. I'm sober. It's, man, Bill and Lois had some really hard times in sobriety. But what I want to point to is that this is a way of life that works in rough going, as Bill's going to say later on. So he says, I found a job. Oh, and thank goodness. So Glenn pointed out last week that they were in debt. And at that time, they were $60,000 in debt. So, and that's $60,000 in debt in 1930s money. Like, it's not good. They are in debt, and he needed that job. And he was paid to work as an investigator again, to go and investigate companies. And he was making $100 a week. And they needed that job. But then he lost it as the result of a brawl with a taxi driver. And we were kind of joking last week about like the big investigation to find out who the taxi cab driver is. Because I did this study with somebody else for a number of years, and not everyone appreciates my fun facts. And this person was not amused when I was like, Dick Johnson, that's the guy. And he was like, you go find out who he got into a brawl with the taxi. You find that taxi driver. And so that's been a little bit of a mission for me, like to try to find the taxi cab driver. If you're wondering, does that person remember they said that? Do they care? Absolutely not. But I'm now fixated on it, and I want to find it. But what I want to point out is that only an alcoholic is getting into a brawl with a taxi cab driver. Only someone who is unable to control the amount that they drink, right? That is not something that normal folk do on a Tuesday afternoon. That is a sign of the allergy. He is drinking himself into some consequences. By the way, I have worked with a sponsee before who was like, oh, really? And I'm like, don't worry, we'll amend with the taxi cab drivers later. Yeah. So it said, mercifully, no one could guess that I was to have no real employment for 5 years. And I just want to point out that's from 1930 to right before 1935 when he sobers up. So he's talking about this length of time, this 5 years, and he's going to discuss it as we read up until page 8. And so it says, my wife began to work in a department store, coming home exhausted to find me drunk. So Lois is working at places like Macy's, where she's helping to design some of the displays. And she's making $19 a week to support their family. And again, I don't know some of the societal pressures, but what I do know of what it's like to not be able to show up to life and support the people that I love in the way that I wanted to, in the way that I needed to. On top of page 5, I became an unwelcome hanger-on at brokerage places. And that was a line that got me right away. I knew intimately what it was like to feel and to be an unwelcome hanger-on. That was me. It says liquor ceased to be a luxury. I know, even so back to the thing, even the name of the cab company would be a start. Watch it be Yellow Cab or something. New York's finest cab. I'm making up cab companies. I should not be. Anywho, focus. Liquor ceased to be a luxury. It became a necessity. Do you remember that moment? And maybe it wasn't a moment that you knew, but it was looking back and we realized the thing that was so important, right? He described it last week as being an exhilarating and important part of his life. It now becomes a necessity. It's something that I need. It says bathtub gin, 2 bottles a day, often 3 got to be routine. Bathtub gin is that home-brewed alcohol because we're in the era of prohibition, and Rob was sharing me some fun facts. And one of the fun facts I didn't realize, I did realize that gin, especially homebrewed gin, was not going to have a delightful taste. But to cover the taste, that's where a lot of cocktails, how they got invented, to cover up that taste. So I was delighted to know that. But I will also say I was not drinking for the taste. That was not my drinking experience. I am a effects girl. I am drinking for the effects, the ease and comfort, and I will take a not great taste if I get a pretty great effect. Alrighty. So it says sometimes a small deal would net a few $100s, and I would pay down my debts. I would go support Lois. I'd look for a place to move out so I don't have to live with the in-laws anymore. No, I would pay my bills at the bars and delicatessens. His money is going to where he can continue to drink. And it's one of those things, if you can tell me, or I can tell you what's important in my life, but what is important is where I'm spending my time and where am I spending my money. We're seeing that's what his priority is. And it says, this went on endlessly. I began to waken very early in the morning, shaking violently. So we're beginning to see some signs of delirium tremens. We're beginning to see some serious signs of the physical consequences of his alcoholism. It says a tumbler full of gin followed by half a dozen bottles, that's 6. So that's a tumbler of gin and a 6-pack would be required if I were to eat any breakfast. And I always want to stop us there because I want to say, hey, if we're looking at Bill, we're probably like, hey, Bill, you're in trouble. Things aren't going so well. Like, I'm worried about you. You're needing a 6-pack and a tumbler of gin to have breakfast. You're starting to show signs of delirium tremens. I'm worried about you. You're in trouble. But this is what Bill says. Nevertheless, I still thought I could control the situation. Sound familiar? People worried, people concerned. Nah, I got this thing. Don't you worry about it. And there were periods of sobriety which renewed my wife's hope. So he's not a daily 24/7 drinker. He's having these periods of sobriety. Again, periods of sobriety are not going to disqualify me from alcoholism. Things aren't very good right now for Bill, but gradually things got worse. We are in a straight trajectory going downhill. And it says the house was taken over by the mortgage holder. My mother-in-law died. My wife and father-in-law became ill. And this probably happened a little bit earlier in Bill's story, but when it talks about his wife becoming ill, one of the things is Bill and Lois, they desperately wanted to be parents. Like, they desperately wanted to have children. And, Lois, she writes in her book about how she had a number of like miscarriages and, just it like really, really horrific stuff that she went through. And Bill, there were times he was always kind to her and he was always loving to her, but there was times that he wasn't able to show up to the hospital and wasn't able to show up to the hospital sober. And what I can say is I know what it's like to have those people that I want to help, those people that I desperately want to support, and letting them down again and again and again. And so after a while, they looked at adoption, and they reached out to an adoption agency. And one of Lois's friends they asked their friends to write a letter of reference, and one of Lois's friends said, no, do not give them a child because of Bill's drinking. And Bill, she got confirmation after he had passed that that's what had happened, but Bill kind of always knew. And it's one of those things, I know what it's like to not only ruin my dreams, but to ruin the dreams of those around me and that I love. That's this illness. This thing is so heartbreaking. It's so devastating. And then it says, then I got a promising opportunity, right? A promising opportunity. Okay, there's this glimmer of hope. Stocks were at the low point of 1932, and I had somehow formed a group to buy. I was to share generously in the profits. Then I went on a prodigious bender. A prodigious bender is a bender to end all benders. Like, whoa, quite the bender. And that chance vanished. Now, I always know this story to be the Applejack story, but Rob gave me some extra information. So what was happening is they were gonna they had this like company, and they were going to like do this new photographic process. It was going to be exciting. And the story that I know, which is probably wrong, and Rob will correct me, it'll be good for me to be wrong, but is that like they brought out this Applejacks, right? And it goes around one time, they're drinking, they're talking about the deal, they're making negotiations, and Bill's like, no, thank you, I shouldn't drink it. Goes around a second time, and he's like, oh, no, thank you, no, I shouldn't drink. Goes around a third time, and he thinks, well, I've never had Applejacks. And off he goes. And he goes on a prodigious bender. And it's one of those ones where, man, it was like drunk for 3 days, and he burnt the contract to the ground. And that was, that little glimpse of hope that, man, if I could get this under control, or if I could just get this one job, or get this one thing, or get away from these charges, like these charges get dropped, it'll be okay. And then at the last moment, burning it to the ground. Again, a sign that he's got the physical allergy, because he does not have just a couple lovely sips of Applejacks. No, 3-day bender, sign of the allergy. And he says, I woke up. And I think in more than one way, he woke up. This had to be stopped. I saw that I could not take so much as one drink. I was through forever. Through forever. Before then, I had written lots of sweet promises. But my wife happily observed that this time I meant business. And so I did. So what we can make a note of is this is the first time we're seeing Bill having his formal swearing off. If we remember in the cycle, that swearing off, I'm never going to drink again. And he means it. And when he talks about sweet promises, Bill, and it was so cool because a lot of the stuff that Rob was sharing in that email, I'm like, yeah, I got that. Not as well detailed as you got it, but I got that. And Bill Wilson, there were times where he would swear off drinking by writing pledges in the family Bible, and the words that he was using, it's like, man, with everything in me, with all the love that I have for you, Lois, I will never do it again. And this is the thing, is anytime and every time I said I never want to do it again, I meant it. I meant it. I did not want to do it again. I did not want to destroy my family. I did not want to hurt my loved ones. I did not want to do it again. But we're going to see very quickly, sorry, spoilers, spoilers for the next paragraph, that has no effect. My desire to not do it again has no effect on my ability to stay sober. And that is mind-boggling. So it says, shortly afterward, I came home drunk. And this, man, it says, there had been no fight. Where had been my high resolve? By the way, came home drunk, allergy. Not came home after 3 drinks thinking what had happened. No, drunk, allergy. There had been no fight. Where had been my high resolve? I simply didn't know. It hadn't even come to mind. Someone had pushed a drink my way, and I had taken it. Was I crazy? I began to wonder, for such an appalling lack of perspective seemed near being just that. If you're writing in your book, you can make a note, the mental obsession, because that's what we're talking about. This appalling lack of perspective. He is sober and somebody pushes a drink his way without a thought, without a thought of the Applejack story, without a thought of the consequences he takes it. That appalling lack of perspective that happens when he's sober. That is the mental obsession. And I'm just going to read something that Rob shared. And so when it talks about, Oh wait, that might be a little bit later. I'll tell it now. But it's that idea that, like, man, he had signed this contract where it was like, if he takes one drink of alcohol, the contract would be void, and he would forfeit his entire interest, including $2,000. So he signed a contract. So it wasn't just promising Lois, but it signed this contract. If I drink, I'm going to forfeit all this money. Made it 5 weeks, right? Made it 5 weeks. And see, that's the thing. It's really helpful for me to understand Bill, to understand me, to see that all these things that I loved, I cared about, I valued, that were important. Man, I tried to put them between me and the first drink, and they were not enough. That is the power of the mental obsession. That is the power of what I'm up against. And it says, renewing my resolve, I tried again. You know what that means? That means he's swearing off again. So you can make it know he's swearing off. We're going to see that cycle go again. He's never going to drink again. Some time passed, and confidence began to be replaced by cocksureness. That's cockiness. He's starting to be a little cocky. He's like, and we'll hear it. I could laugh at the gin mills. Now I had what it takes. He's got it. Ain't no thing. He's got it licked. Don't you worry. One day I walked into a cafe to telephone. And at that period, right between that sentence and the next, you can make a little note, the mental obsession. Because what kicked in for him between that sentence and the next was the insane thought that said I could take a drink. Or it was almost like he didn't think at all. And it says, and in no time, I was beating on the bar, asking myself how it could have happened. He's drinking again. And it says, as the whiskey rose to my head, I told myself I would manage better next time, but I might as well get good and drunk then, and I did. And isn't that what the physical allergy looks like when it's on me? That once I start to drink, sometimes it looks like more, sometimes it looks like, well, I've already messed it up, I might as well get drunk. Doesn't it sometimes look like I just changed my mind? So that's his physical allergy. So we saw him swear off, we saw very little sneaky, but we saw the mental obsession. And we see him taking that drink, and the phenomenon of craving, it develops, and he goes on a spree. Now this spree it's not going to last too long. We're going to see what happens. And it says the remorse, horror, and hopelessness of the next morning are unforgettable. So that is that remorse and regret, that horror, that hopelessness, that shame, that I hate myself, that I come to the morning after. And it says the courage to do battle was not there. What he's talking about is that depression, that like I'm not able to get out of bed, that I don't think I could face life. That's what he's talking about. And it says, my brain raced uncontrollably. And there was a terrible sense of impending calamity. A racing brain, that means my thoughts going quickly and quickly and quickly. And a terrible sense of impending calamity, that's a feeling. Impending means like right now, it's going to happen right now. And calamity is something bad. So he's got this terrible feeling that something bad's going to happen right now. And his thoughts are racing and thoughts are going. He's having terrible anxiety. That's what he's having. That's what he's feeling. And it says, I hardly dared cross the street, lest I collapse and be run down by an early morning truck, for it was scarcely daylight. An all-night place supplied me with a dozen. That's 12. Sometimes I like to point out what the numbers are, because I'll read dozen and we think dozen, but no, 12. 12 glasses of ale. And then it says, my writhing nerves were stilled at last. You know that feeling when it's like your nerves are writhing. It's like that, like somebody is stabbing my shoulder blades. That feeling, and it takes 12 glasses to calm that. And it says a morning paper told me the market had gone to hell again. Well, so would I. The market would recover, but I wouldn't. That was a hard thought. Should I kill myself? should I kill myself? Page 3, I had arrived. Page 4, suicide, that disgusts me. Page 6, right at the middle, should I kill myself? No, no, not now. Not now. Suicide's becoming an option for him. Then the mental fog settled down. You know, that mental fog, that depression, that like, oh, gin would fix that. He's still getting some ease and comfort. Still getting that ease and comfort. So 2 bottles and oblivion. We're going to see this progress. It says the mind and body are marvelous mechanisms. For mine endured this agony 2 more years. So between 33 and 35. Sometimes I stole from my wife's slender purse when the morning terror and madness were on me. Can I relate to doing things that I wouldn't necessarily want to do, or things that degrade my sense of self, just so I can get that drink, just so I can get that drug, just so I can get that next whatever it is that brings you to the study. And it says again, I swayed dizzily before an open window or the medicine cabinet where there was poison, cursing myself for a weakling. Right now, he's actively suicidal. So he's standing in front of an open window and he wants to jump, but he doesn't have the courage to do it. Or he's looking at the pills in the medicine cabinet and he wants to end it all, but he doesn't have the courage to take them. Page 3, I had arrived. Page 4, that disgusts me. Paragraph up, no, not now. And at this point, he wants to die, but he doesn't have the courage. It says there were flights from city to country and back as my wife sought escape. So he's having some periods of sobriety to try to separate himself from the first drink, and it's not working. It says, then came the night where the physical and mental torture was so hellish. I feared I would burst through my window, sash and all. Somehow, I managed to drag my mattress to a lower floor, lest I suddenly leap. So what's happening here is now he doesn't feel like he can even keep himself safe. He is feeling, you know, that like suicidal? And hopefully you don't know what I'm talking about. Like, God, I hope you don't. But that suicidal where it's not even you want to die. It's like you're holding on so you don't do it. Because it feels like it's going to happen and I can't stop myself. That's where he's at. And he's afraid he's going to jump out the window. And when it's a sash and all, I kind of always thought like sash was like an evening gown sort of thing. Or I didn't think Bill Wilson had like a pageant like Mr. Alcoholic or anything. Not pageant sash like that. No, but a sash is like the window frame. So he's afraid he's going to hit it with such velocity. It's not about shattering the window. It's taking the window with him. And so what he does is, this is how unsafe he feels. He's dragging the mattress down the stairs because he doesn't feel like he can't not jump out the window. That's what's going on for Bill. And then it says, a doctor came with a heavy sedative. And I want you to know, I have a feeling that we all know what happens next. We all know. I feel like, I can be wrong. But I feel like you ask an alcoholic, what happens next? We know. You ask a non-alcoholic what happens next, they'll be like, I don't know. Did the sedatives work? Did the sedatives help him? What happened? It's a mystery. Not a mystery for us. Next day found me drinking both gin and sedative. Woo! And maybe you guys don't relate, but what I will say is, the things that say don't drink with alcohol or may cause drowsiness? Oh, those were little alcoholic enhancers. You know what I mean? Just helps cuts down on the cost of drinking. It's just economics, you guys. Especially if they're not my pills, which regularly they weren't. Well, they were mine now. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it said this combination soon landed me on the rocks. He is in trouble. People feared for my sanity. And this is an interesting thing. So did I. We're really beginning to see Bill be like, man, this is not good. That inner awakening to I am in trouble here. Because Lois has been worried since page 2. You know what I mean? Lois is like, Bill, I'm concerned about your drinking. Now, we actually don't know this yet, but Lois was worried about Bill's drinking page 1. But she's been worried forever. But he's starting to be like, I'm worried. about my sanity. I could eat little or nothing when drinking, and I was 40 pounds underweight. My brother-in-law, and that's Lois's husband, and Dr. Leonard V. Strong, and he's got an interesting role in Alcoholics Anonymous and how the big book got written, but that might be a little too in depth. And so he's a physician, and through his kindness and that of my mother, I was placed in a nationally known hospital for the mental and physical rehabilitation of alcoholics. So the date I have is the summer of 1933, and I can be wrong. And he's going to the Towns Hospital in New York City. And if you've been coming to the study for a little while, or you just know, you might be like, hey, that's a little familiar. Isn't that where that guy Silkworth worked? Heck yeah, we're going to hear about it. And so we'll look at it this way. Bill Wilson, he's going to rehab for the first time. And so every time we go to rehab, what is that? That is a swearing off. He's never going to do it again. So let's see what happens. So it says, under the so-called belladonna treatment, my brain cleared. Hydrotherapy and mild exercise helped much. And I always, like, for years, I would regularly joke. Now, this was like, I'd say like maybe 7-8 years ago. Rehabs out this way, they were really big on volleyball and painting rocks. So I'd be like, belladonna, hydrotherapy, it's the 1930s equivalent of volleyball and rock painting. They don't do that anymore at rehabs locally. So it's not even a good joke. It's just an old joke. But I looked into it because it's like, what the heck is hydrotherapy? What the heck is belladonna? So belladonna is actually another name for a poison, or the treatment. What came with it is a poison called deadly nightshade, which is like a full-on, like if you wanted to be like a witch, like that's a full-on like poison. You know what I mean? That's you're done poison. So an absolutely fatal poison, but they would give it to the drunks, don't you worry, at low enough doses that it wouldn't kill us, but that it would produce hallucinations. And it was kind of the hope that it would rewire and like just rewire the brain so we wouldn't want to drink again. And like that's what they were throwing at us. So Bill Wilson, he tried the belladonna, and it kind of helped. He's like, oh, I'm feeling a little better. Do not this. I'm not advocating for belladonna treatment. Don't be like, hey, it helped. No, that's not the takeaway. Permanent sobriety. Don't try to belladonna yourself. No. And then it says hydrotherapy, and it's like, what is hydrotherapy? Well, in the 1930s at that time, they realized that warm baths and warm showers had a calming effect. So that's what it was. It was a lot of like warm baths, warm showers. So I'm just going to point out, do not be taking belladonna. And it's important to take showers. It's important to take baths. No problem with bubble baths. But that is not a permanent solution for alcoholism, because we're going to see what happens. Oh no, I should have told Reg sooner. He just took the belladonna. No. We'll plan an intervention. Oh, Rob's got really cool pictures of belladonna treatment if you're interested. And that's the thing. Also, if you're wondering, like if you live with a spouse or you live with other people, it's going to be way more fun to be like, excuse me, I need to engage in hydrotherapy treatment rather than I'm just going to go upstairs and take a shower. You know what I'm saying? Just confuse them. This is why I shouldn't live with people. Oh, all right. And it says, best of all, I met a kind doctor. And this is our guy, Dr. Silkworth. And Dr. Silkworth, he wrote the chapter, The Doctor's Opinion. A kind doctor who explained, though certainly selfish and foolish, I had been seriously ill, bodily and mentally. And whenever we talk about being bodily ill, what we're talking about is that physical allergy. So we're pointing to that lack of control once I start to drink. And when it talks about being seriously ill mentally, what we are talking about is the mental obsession, that insane thought that I have when I'm sober that tells me I can drink again. And he says, it relieved me somewhat to learn that in alcoholics, the will is amazingly weakened when it comes to combating liquor, though it often remains strong in other respects. My incredible behavior in the face of a desperate desire to stop was explained. So those few sentences were talking about the mental obsession. He's learning that, like, when it comes to not taking the first drink, willpower isn't enough, even though he's got willpower in all these other areas. This is many years ago. But I used to be quite in shape. And I used to, just some of you are like, girl, yeah, I know. I used to go for runs. So this tells you how, like, I would go for 2 runs a day. I would do weight training every day. I was able to keep that sort of routine, able to do that sort of stuff. I had a lot of self-will. I had a lot of willpower. I don't even like getting up before noon. I will for sponsees. But I used to get up at like 6 in the morning to go for a run every day, even in Canada in the winter. Like, I have willpower, but I couldn't stop myself from taking the first drink. So when it comes to not taking that first one, willpower is not enough. But Bill Wilson, he's got self-knowledge. All right, so he's gone to the hospital. He's had his belladonna. He's had his hydrotherapy. He's got knowledge. He understands what alcoholism is. He understands his lack of control and lack of choice. And he says, understanding myself now, I fared forth and I hope. So he's swearing off. He's living life. He's got this thing. He's got self-knowledge. For 3 or 4 months, the goose hung high. Now, I'm going to explain that metaphor to you. Not because you need to know it in order to stay sober, but I was always worried it was referring to a dead goose. The goose is alive in this metaphor. So what that meant is, in the olden days, they had expressions and sayings, and if the geese were flying high in the sky, what that meant was that, like, there were no evil spirits abound. But if the geese were flying low to the ground, evil spirits. So geese are flying high, no evil spirits, we're good to go. And it's one of those things, I love that metaphor. And when I work with sponsees, if they're ever struggling with the idea of God, or they're ever struggling with the idea of a loving God. Now, this is me with my sponsees, and you can tell I'm a little weird, and this is a little weird. I'm sure no one here at this point is shocked. But whenever they're struggling with that conception, I always point out, listen, duck's feet are orange. Orange. Like, only a loving God would do that. And whimsical and delightful. So even the geese with their some of the geese, we have Canada geese, and they are not delightful and whimsical. They're quite aggressive. But other geese have their delightful orange feet, and you can know that only loving God would do that. God loves you. So the goose hung high. He's got it. And so he says, I went to town regularly and even made a little money. And something I want to point out is financial success is not the success that we're after here in 12 Step. It's not about progress, not perfection. It's about spiritual progress. And he doesn't know what he doesn't know, but he's progressing. He's making money. He went to town. Everything's great. Surely this was the answer, self-knowledge. He's got it. He learned from the guy himself. He could draw the cycle on the board. He knows it. He knows what's up. He's got self-knowledge. Ain't no thing gonna happen. But it was not. For the frightful day came when he drank once more. And what happened between him taking that drink? The mental obsession. Before he took that drink, he had a thought. And it says, the curve of my declining moral and bodily health fell off like a ski jump. After a time, I returned to the hospital. So this is, I have it as the summer of 1934, but it might have been a little bit later, as the autumn. So Scott shared his hydrotherapy for, he got into a bad accident. He was sober. He was not jaywalking. He's a recovered jaywalker. And had some hydrotherapy. Oh, and ice baths, which ice bath sounds like it would be great in Thailand. Not so delightful in October in Canada as we approach the winter. I would like the warm ones. Thank you. But I see why in Thailand. We want the cold one. Focus. All right. So for the frightful day came when I drank once more. The curve of my declining moral and bodily health fell off like a ski jump. And just kind of an interesting thing. If you've ever seen a ski jump, it goes down, and then because it's a jump, it's a very steep incline. And it was kind of at that point where my life fell off like a ski jump. I was spending a couple months in a hospital, and my hospital in the psych ward, because I manage things well. And I was my view for 3 months was looking at Canada Olympic Park, where they have the ski jumps. Little did I know that was the trajectory of my life, getting out of the psych ward. Again, I don't think I'm the empress of my life, but I think I got some good ideas. It was homeless. That's where we were going. Anywho, so it says, after a time I returned to the hospital. This was the finish, the curtain. It seemed to me he feels like he's done. My weary and despairing wife was informed that it would all end with heart failure during delirium tremens. Yeah, so the heart failure, so delirium tremens are what happens during the physical withdrawals from alcohol. And Dr. Silkworth was saying Bill's heart is just going to give out, or he would develop a wet brain. Wet brain is Korsakoff, or Wernicke's encephalopathy, or Wernicke's Korsakoff syndrome. And it's basically where you drink yourself into permanent brain damage. She would soon have to give me over to the undertaker or the asylum. And then it says they did not need to tell me. And what's an interesting thing about this is they did not tell Bill. Bill Wilson is in his hospital bed, and he's overhearing Dr. Silkworth tell Lois. Because at that time, Dr. Silkworth, they kind of had that, like, we don't want to depress the patients. We don't want to bum this guy out. Bill Wilson is overhearing it. And Dr. Silkworth is saying, like, listen, Lois, you're going to have to put him away in an asylum or get his affairs in order, because I don't think he's going to live much longer. And you're going to have to take responsibility of this. And in this moment, so Bill Wilson, he has knowledge of his alcoholism. But now in this moment, what he knows is that he is going to die of his alcoholism. So he's got self-knowledge, but now he also has fear. He's going to stay sober off the fear. And by the way, I'm not judging him. I'm not saying, oh, how dare, it's because what else does he have? He's got nothing else, right? He goes back to the hospital. He's swearing off. He knows he's going to die, and he can't, he's just, man, I don't want to die. I don't want to do this. I better hold on. And he says, they did not need to tell me. They didn't. I knew and almost welcomed the idea. It was a devastating blow to my pride. I, who had thought so well of myself and of my abilities, of my capacity to surmount obstacles, was cornered at last. So he's like, man, I was able to do these things and overcome these things, but now I'm cornered. He's come to the end of himself. And that's where I need to get to, that coming to the end of myself. Now I was to plunge into the dark, joining that endless procession of sots who had gone on before. He's going to die like all those other alcoholics. I thought of my poor wife. There had been much happiness after all. What would I not give to make amends? But that was over now. No words can tell of the loneliness and despair that I found in that bitter morass of self-pity. Quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I had met my match. I had been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master. And if you're writing in your book, what I make the note of is that is Bill Wilson's step one. He knows he's done. He knows it's complete defeat for him. Now, he's not going to stay sober on a step one. And it's that idea of like being in quicksand like that. It's sucking him in, and he's got no avenue for escape. And the more he struggles, the more he's sucked in. And it's a little heavy, so I'm going to make a little joke. Growing up, I thought quicksand was going to be a much larger concern. You know what I mean? With all the shows and stuff. Thank goodness that has not come into fruition. I'm also real good at stop, drop, and roll. Have not had to use that as an adult. So just good, I know, have not used. Oh, Reg, try stop, drop, and roll for the belladonna. I'm just teasing. And it says, trembling, I stepped from the hospital a broken man. And so he's running on fear. He's running on, I'm not going to do it again. Fear sobered me for a bit. Then came the insidious insanity. That's the mental obsession. You can make a note. of that first drink. And on Armistice Day, 1934, I was off again. That's November 11th, 1934. And I love this story because it really emphasizes just how powerful the mental obsession is. So it was the celebration of, because nowadays it's more of a day of remembrance, and it's a more solemn occasion, but these were World War I veterans, and it was a bit of a celebration for them. And so I'm going to read something out of Lois Remembers to tell you how this relapse looked, because, it's quite telling. So after leaving towns in late September, Bill stayed sober until November 11th, Armistice Day. As work prevented me from celebrating with him, Bill went to Staten Island by himself to play golf. He hadn't sworn off the booze, had not sworn off the golf. Golf is not his problem. And it says, when I reached home that evening, he was not there. At 5 o'clock in the morning, after a sleepless night, I found him unconscious, propped up against the iron gate in the basement airway, his head bleeding. Ever come to a little like that? It seems the bus to the golf course had broken down. While waiting for another, he and his seatmate went to a pub. They're going to talk to each other because they, don't have phones to isolate and scroll. They're making conversations or something crazy. While Bill righteously sipped ginger ale, he carefully explained to his companion why he couldn't drink liquor. So he's sitting in this bar drinking ginger ale and explaining to this newfound friend that he met, I cannot drink because once I drink, I set off this physical allergy and I need more. And the more that I drink, the more that I have to drink, and I cannot stop myself. And man, if I drink again, I will die. I overheard that I'm going to develop wet brain. So I'm going to drink myself into permanent brain damage, or I'm going to die during delirium tremens. My heart is going to give out. He's explaining this. And as he carefully explained to his companion why he couldn't drink liquor, soon the bartender came along and said, it's Armistice Day. Have one in the house. With visions of the first Armistice Day in France, and without another thought, Bill gulped down the drink. His companion was flabbergasted. You must be crazy. Yes, said Bill. I am crazy. And that's the power of the mental obsession. We're just going to finish this paragraph, which is so cool because I didn't think we'd make it here, because this is the natural transition, the end of this paragraph. So it says, everyone became resigned to the certainty that I would have to be shut up somewhere or would stumble along to a miserable end. How dark it is before the dawn, the hopeless to the hope, that darkness to light. In reality, that was to be the beginning of my last debauch, his last spree. I was soon to be catapulted. What I want to point out is he's going to get there with some velocity. We're going to read catapulted on page 8. The next time we hear about this fourth dimension, it's going to be rocketed. So it does not take long to get well, but catapulted into what I like to call the fourth dimension of existence. The fourth dimension of existence is just another way to say a spiritual experience or a spiritual awakening. If you stick with me in this big book study, you'll know that I make this joke about how, no, we're not going to go to the spiritual appendix in the back. We will. I promise we will eventually. But I like to find all the sneaky, subtle descriptions of a spiritual awakening in the book. Not the spiritual appendix isn't, but in what we typically read. And so this is the description of what a spiritual awakening looks like. It says, I was to know happiness, peace, and usefulness in a way of life. Oh man, I'm not done. I can't set it and forget it. I got to keep doing it. Way of life that is incredibly more wonderful as time passes. And we'll leave it there, and we'll pick up next week while we go from hopeless to hope. I want to thank you guys for being with me, and I'll stop the recording and we can all say a prayer together.